AITA for stopping mortgage payments and locking my parents out after they gave my house away? I am Sierra, although almost everyone calls me C. And back then my life seemed pretty simple. I had a good office job, my own comfortable house, a family that cared about me. My mom, my stepfather Roger, and my younger half-sister Paige, who had just turned 18. They lived in a much more modern house, in a planned subdivision closer to downtown. Although they were still paying off a heavy mortgage that they had many years left to settle. One Sunday afternoon, my mom came to see me as usual to have coffee. She sat at the dining room table, looked out the window at the backyard garden, and smiled in a strange way. "See, honey, can we talk for a moment?" she said, stirring her coffee while still looking at the patio. I nodded, not knowing where she was going with this. "Roger and I have been thinking," she continued. "This house of yours is exactly what we always dreamed of. The quiet location, the space for the garden, the calm." I frowned, intrigued. Something did not add up. "And besides, your commute to work from here is very exhausting," she continued. "Our house is much closer to your office." That was when she dropped her big idea, her brilliant plan, swapping houses. They would come live in my grandmother's house, my house, and I would go live in their house in the subdivision. I just had to take charge of continuing to pay the mortgage that was in their name. "Think about it," she said with her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "You would save a lot of time in traffic. Our house is bigger, more modern. The kitchen is remodeled. And your stepfather and I always wanted to live in a place as peaceful as this." I thought about it for a moment. It did not sound too bad. Their house was newer, had a more updated kitchen and more space. And yes, the location would cut my daily commute almost in half. Seemed logical. "What about the paperwork?" I asked. "Should we not put something in writing?" Mom waved her hand as if shooing away a mosquito. "Oh honey, we are family. Why spend money on lawyers? You know I would never do anything to hurt you." I let those words sink into my head. We are family. In the end I agreed. The switch happened quickly. They moved into my house in the quiet suburbs, and I settled into the modern house in the subdivision closer to my work. I got comfortable quickly. Every month I made a transfer to my mom for the mortgage, almost always sending a little more than what the bank asked for, because I wanted to help them finish the debt faster. I also started investing in the house. I replaced old appliances, painted rooms, and had some details remodeled. I treated it as if it were truly mine already. For 4 years that was our arrangement. I paid the mortgage without failing a single month, often contributing extra when I could. Everything seemed perfect. I had a shorter commute, a modern house, and or so I thought, a solid agreement with my family. The work trip was to another city and seemed like just another assignment. 2 weeks of meetings, presentations, and hotel nights. All I could think about was going back to sleep in my own bed. The last thing I expected was to literally find myself locked out of my own life. It was a chilly afternoon when the Uber dropped me off in front of the house. I got out with my suitcase, exhausted, and walked up the sidewalk to the door. The first thing I noticed was something strange. The porch light was on and I could hear voices inside. Weird, because I lived alone and was sure I had not left any lights on. "How strange," I muttered, putting the key in the lock. The key did not turn. I tried again. Nothing. The confusion started turning into a knot in my stomach. I tried a third time, harder, as if the lock was to blame for everything. That was when I realized they had changed the locks. Just as I was about to call a locksmith, the door swung open. There was Paige, now 22 years old, wearing my favorite fuzzy slippers. She leaned against the doorframe, looking at me as if I were an annoying salesperson. Behind her, a tall guy I recognized as her husband, Derek, was lying on my couch with his feet on my coffee table. "Oh, you are back," Paige said with a smirk. "Your things are in the garage." I stood there with my suitcase in my hand, trying to process what I had just heard. "My things? What are you talking about?" "This is my house," I finally said, feeling the heat rise to my face. "Not anymore," she answered, looking at her perfectly manicured nails. The same nails my parents always paid for, even when they said there was no money to buy me new clothes. "Mom and Roger gave it to us as a wedding gift. We live here now." I felt the world tilt a little to the side. "Are you serious?" "I have been paying the mortgage on this house for 4 years," I said, my voice rising. "Yeah, well, that is not my problem," Paige replied, rolling her eyes just like my mom did when she was about to invalidate someone's feelings. Mom and Roger gave us the house. She waved her hand. You need to leave. Get off our property before we call the police. I was standing on my own porch. Suddenly, I was without a place to stay. All at once memories came flooding back that I had tried to minimize. All the times Paige was given special treatment, the new cell phone for her while I was stuck with an old phone that barely sent text. The designer clothes for her while I was given hand-me-downs. The latest model car for her sweet 16 while I took public transportation. The expensive private college for her while I worked and studied at the same time at a more affordable community college. All of that came back like a punch. I was shaking with frustration as my little sister prepared to shut the door in my face. And where am I supposed to go? I asked, feeling my voice crack. That is not my problem, she said, shrugging her shoulders. Go to a hotel. I do not know. Just do not come back here. The door slammed shut. I heard laughter from inside. Paige and Derek making themselves comfortable in the house I had paid for 4 years. The house I had fixed up, painted, and taken care of as if it were my future. I do not really remember how I got to my car. I do not remember the whole drive to the other house. I only know that before I knew it, I was driving toward the house that had belonged to my grandmother, the house that my mom and Roger now occupied on paper. All I could think about was the same old pattern. The favoritism, the special treatment, the way Paige always got what she wanted and I just had to understand and put up with it, but this was different. It was not a cell phone or a dress. It was my home, my stability. I arrived furious, got out of the car almost running, and walked up the front steps. The porch light illuminated the garden I had personally tended for years before the swap. I raised my hand in a fist and pounded on the door so hard that my knuckles hurt. Mom, open up. We need to talk about what Paige did. Called out. I heard movement inside. Whispered voices, footsteps getting closer. But the door barely opened. See, my mother's voice said through the wood. It sounded muffled but clear enough. Go away, please. I must have misheard. What? I almost choked. Mom, opened the door. Paige just locked me out of the house whose mortgage I have been paying for 4 years. That is not your house anymore. Roger chimed in from inside, raising his voice. And neither is this one. This house is ours. I felt the floor shift beneath me. What are you talking about? This house is mine. Grandma Eleanor left it to me, I said, pressing my palms against the door to steady myself. You need to leave, my mom replied, using that serious tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable. Go rent an apartment. Stop going from house to house making people nervous. Making you nervous? I repeated in disbelief. Are you serious? You left me without a place to stay. Paige is living in the house I have been paying for. And now you will not even let me come in to talk. We have invested a lot in this house, my mom replied sharply. We have remodeled it, we have fixed it up, we have also spent money. And what about all the money I invested in the other house? I said, no longer caring if the neighbors heard. The new appliances, the expensive water heater, the remodeled bathroom, the 4 years of mortgage payments. That is different, she answered. Different how? I asked with a broken voice. Mom, you planned this from the beginning, right? For me to pay the mortgage while you lived in my house. And then you gave that house to Paige and kept Grandma's house. You left me without a home while you divided everything up among yourselves. There was a long pause. When my mom spoke again, her voice was cold. You have to leave right now, see? This is our house and we do not want you here. Something broke inside me at that moment. 4 years of payments, remodeling, favors, and silences collided with a lifetime of seeing how everything always leaned to the same side. Suddenly, everything became very clear. You are wrong about that, Mom, I said, suddenly with a strange calmness. This house is legally mine. The deed is still in my name. Grandma left it to me. And if you like leaving family members without a place to stay so much, maybe it is time I do the same. You would not dare, Roger growled from inside. Try me, I replied. I am done being the one who always gives in. I am done watching you favor Paige while using me. Get out of my house or I will evict you legally. Silence. I waited another moment and then I turned around. I had nowhere to go, but I already knew what I had to do. An hour later I was checking into a cheap motel with my suitcase still unpacked from the trip. I sat on the bed, took out my phone and started looking for lawyers. My hands were still shaking, but not out of fear anymore. Now it was determination. The next day I spoke with him. Mr. Harrison, the lawyer who took my case, did not beat around the bush. He asked me for the paperwork for my grandmother's house, the transfer receipts I had been making for years, the messages I had with my mom about our agreement. He reviewed everything calmly. It is clear, Sierra, he told me at the end. This house is yours and what your parents did to you is not right at all. Within the next 2 days, he prepared all the necessary paperwork for the eviction. I stood behind him on the porch of my grandmother's house, while he knocked on the door with firm, professional knocks. This time my mom opened it. Her face went pale when she saw the papers in the lawyer's hand. "Good morning, ma'am," Mr. Harrison said with a firm voice. "I come on behalf of your daughter Sierra, the legal owner of this property. I am here to serve you with an eviction notice. You cannot do this." Roger appeared behind her, red with anger. "Actually, we can," the lawyer replied without losing his cool. "And we are doing it. You have 3 days to vacate the property voluntarily. If you do not, we will have to start legal proceedings and, if necessary, involve law enforcement to carry out the eviction." I stood back in silence, watching my mom's face go from surprise to anger and then to worry. She tried to catch my eye, but I looked away. "See, honey," she finally said with a sweet voice I knew very well. "We can talk about this. There is no need to take it this far. The time to talk was before you left me without a home and gave my house to Paige." I interrupted her. 3 days, Mom, that is it. Those 3 days were the longest of my life. I stayed in the motel, jumping every time my cell phone rang. I expected them to call at any moment to argue or plead, but surprisingly they complied. On the morning of the 4th day, Mr. Harrison called to tell me the house was already empty. When I arrived, they were loading the last boxes into a moving truck. My mom was standing in the driveway with red eyes from crying so much, looking at me as if I were the one in the wrong. "You are no longer my daughter," she said, with tears streaming down her face. "You turned your back on us after everything we have done for you." I let out a bitter laugh. "After everything you have done for me," I repeated. "Do you mean using me to pay the mortgage for 4 years while you plan to take my house away?" "Yeah, thanks for that." She did not say anything else. She got into the car with Roger. I watched them drive away to whatever rental they managed to get with all those debts. The moving truck followed them and suddenly the driveway was empty. The house was mine again. I went in carefully. There were open drawers, things out of place, but nothing seriously damaged. It was more messy than anything. I walked into the living room and sat in my Grandma Eleanor's old rocking chair. I felt her presence for the first time since this nightmare began. I smiled a little. I was determined. I was not going to pay a single penny more of their mortgage. They broke the verbal agreement the moment they changed the locks and handed that house over to Paige. Now they would have to face the consequences of their decisions. But even though I felt resolute, I could not stop thinking about all the money I had invested in the subdivision house. The new appliances, the expensive water heater, the bathroom remodel, every penny I put in there thinking it would one day truly be my house, and especially the mortgage. Years of on-time payments, always sending more than what the bank asked for, thinking the debt would go down faster that way. According to my calculations, there were about $50,000 left to pay, about 2 more years at the rate I was going, and the house would have been completely paid off. I had been so close, all that money, I whispered, alone in the living room, all those extra payments. Then a memory came to mind that I had pushed aside when it happened, not wanting to see it for what it was. It was right after we did the house swap. Mom was sitting in my grandmother's kitchen, already moved in, stirring her coffee with that innocent face she put on every time she wanted to ask me for something. "See, honey," she said on that occasion, "I have been thinking. Since we are going to live here, maybe you should transfer the deed to us so everything is official. When we finish paying the mortgage on the other house, we will sign it over to your name. That way things are even." I remembered how reasonable she sounded at the time, as if she just wanted to get the paperwork in order. I had had a different idea. And why do we not do it the other way around? I told her, "You transfer the mortgage to my name right now. I will keep paying the bank directly like I have been doing, and I will sign over grandmother's house to you right away. That way everything is clear from the start." My mom's face changed for a fraction of a second, barely a blink. Then she smiled far too quickly. "Oh honey, that would be complicated with the bank," she rushed to answer. "It is better to wait until we finish paying and then we do a clean swap of the two houses." Roger walked in right then and joined the conversation. "Yes, it is much simpler that way, Sierra," he said, nodding. "There is no need to get the bank or lawyers involved in this. We are family. Why go through all that paperwork?" Sitting now in my grandmother's rocking chair, I saw it all clearly. They never intended to give me that house. They wanted both. If I had signed the deed over to their name at that moment, I would have been left without any legal standing, no house, nowhere to go. At least I had the foresight not to do it. It was not enough consolation when I thought about all the lost money, but at least I had a roof over my head. I had the house my grandmother left me to secure my future, and above all a very expensive lesson about trust even within the family. 3 days after I stopped making the mortgage payment, my cell phone rang while I was in the kitchen having coffee and trying to figure out how I was going to rebuild my life. My mom's name appeared on the screen. I was about to not answer, but a part of me needed that confrontation. I answered. "What about the mortgage payment?" That was the first thing she said without even saying hello. Her voice sounded demanding. "The bank is going to charge us late fees." I let out a laugh. "Are you seriously calling to ask me for money right now?" I asked. "Of course," she said, annoyed. "You have to pay the mortgage." "Let me see if I understood this correctly," I said, squeezing my mug so hard my knuckles turned white. "You left me without a place to stay in the house whose mortgage I have paid for 4 years. You gave that house to Paige and her husband, and you still expect me to keep paying. Are you serious?" "That house belongs to Paige," she interrupted me. "Then let Paige pay for it," I replied quickly. "She lives there, right? Very married, very happy in the house I remodeled. In the house whose debt I was paying off." My mom's voice got higher, like always when things did not go her way. "Paige cannot pay the mortgage," she said. "She just finished college, she is not working yet. They had a beautiful wedding and are just getting settled. It is not fair for her to carry that debt." "That is not my problem anymore," I cut her off. I felt a strange calm as I said it. "You gave her my house. Perfect. You also gave her the payments. Let her take care of everything." There was a pause. Then her voice changed to a threatening tone. "Fine, then we are going to move back into your house," she said, "into your grandmother's house. We are going to come in whether you like it or not." I laughed. "In your dreams," I answered. "Try it and I will be the one calling the police. I already evicted you once. Do you want to do it again?" "You cannot just stop paying," she insisted. "We had an agreement." "An agreement you broke when you decided to give my house away just like that," I replied. "Besides, it was almost paid off." "What was left?" "About $50,000. The silence on the other end of the line put a knot in my stomach. It was the kind of silence that announces bad news. "Mom," I said slowly, "is it less or is it more?" "It is more," she muttered in a voice I did not remember ever hearing from her. Almost guilty. "How much more?" I asked. Another pause. Longer. I could hear her breathing. "About $150,000, she finally said. The world tilted again. The mug slipped from my hand. It hit the kitchen counter and rolled, luckily without breaking. "That is impossible," I said, almost breathless. "I have been sending extra payments for 4 years. Thousands above what the bank asked for. There is no way the debt is still that high. What did you do with the extra money I sent?" My mother's silence was deafening. "I am asking you something," I said firmly. "What did you do with the extra money?" "We paid the minimum on the mortgage like always," she finally said, in an almost casual tone, as if talking about the weather. "The extra money you sent, well, we had expenses." "What expenses?" I insisted. "Your stepfather and I, we needed a vacation after all the stress of moving," she began. "We went to Europe for 3 weeks, Paris, Rome, Madrid, beautiful cities." She let out a dreamy sigh. "Then there was Paige's college," she continued. "You know how expensive private college is. And obviously we had to remodel the house a bit. Everything costs money, honey." I could not breathe. "You used my money for vacations and other things while I was sacrificing to pay down the debt," I finally said with a low but firm voice. "Do not be dramatic, Sierra," she scoffed. "We are family. We just redistributed the money where it was needed most." I hung up. My hands were shaking so much that my cell phone fell to the floor. I sat in the rocking chair and stayed there for an hour, feeling the weight of the betrayal burning inside me. When I finally calmed down, I blocked all their numbers, my mom's, Roger's, and Paige's. Done. But of course they were not going to give up that easily. 2 days later they showed up at my grandmother's house, pounding on the door and yelling as if they were the owners. "Open this door right now," my mom called out. "We have to talk about the mortgage payment." I stayed on the inside without moving, with my hand on the doorknob, but without opening it. "There is nothing to talk about," I answered. "I am not going to pay a single cent more." "You have to do it," Roger yelled, now with a furious voice. "You started with the payments. That mortgage is your responsibility." "Actually no," I replied, feeling stronger with the door between us. "What I do have are bank statements showing everything I paid, messages and emails where you guys talk about the house swap, and a lawyer who already told me the situation is not in your favor." There was silence on the other side. "If you do not stop harassing me," I continued, "I am going to take this to court. And believe me, I am in a much better position than you to handle a long and expensive legal process. Do you want to try it?" They stayed quiet for a few seconds. Then they started hurling insults. I did not answer. I stayed silent until I heard the car start and drive away. Only then did I let out the breath I did not know I was holding. A week later, my cousin Caitlin called me. "See, I think you should know this," she said bluntly. "Your parents are struggling. They cannot handle the mortgage payments. They wiped out their savings, even what they had for retirement. And Paige had a horrible argument with them when they told her she had to start paying. She was upset that she was promised a free house, not a debt. The neighbors say the commotion could be heard from down the block." I hung up and kept staring out the window at grandmother's garden. The lilies she had planted were starting to bloom. The purple of the petals contrasted with the green of the leaves. A phrase she always repeated came to my mind. "You reap what you sow." I wondered what they were going to reap. 3 months after I stopped paying the mortgage, I found out my parents finally showed Paige who they really were. My cousin Erin called me with fresh gossip. "You are not going to believe it," she said. "Your parents called the police to have Paige and Derek leave the house. They told them that if they did not start paying the mortgage, they had to leave. Paige refused, of course. Your parents showed up with 2 police officers and an eviction notice they got with a lawyer. The neighbors say Paige was upset about broken promises the entire time she was packing her things." I closed my eyes for a moment. It was like watching the same situation play out again, but with a different main character. And that was just the beginning. Calls started coming in from different relatives, each one with a piece of the puzzle. My Aunt Renee told me my parents were asking everyone to borrow money, that they were calling anyone who had a little saved up, practically begging. My Uncle Ronald told me they had tried to refinance the mortgage, but the bank denied their application. My cousin Mason mentioned they were asking about reverse mortgages and loans using the house as collateral, as if they could keep stretching a rope that was already about to snap. Then came the call that completely opened my eyes. It was from my Aunt Michelle, my mom's sister, the one who always found out about everything. "Did you know about the other loans?" she asked in a low voice. "What loans?" I answered, although I was already dreading something. "They took out personal loans for Paige's car," she blurted out, "that fancy Mercedes they gave her when she graduated. And you are not going to believe this, but they also borrowed money for her honeymoon. They paid for 2 weeks in the Maldives for her and Derek. They are up to their necks in debt, see. I am not exaggerating." I stayed there for a long time with the phone in my hand after hanging up. I thought about all the nights I ate simple meals just so I could send a little more money toward the mortgage. About all the things I did not buy for myself because it was better to send extra, that way I finish faster. Them meanwhile strolling through Europe and the Maldives. The last piece of information came from someone I never imagined would get involved. My friend Claire, who worked at a bank. We met for coffee and after normal talk, she leaned toward me with a serious face. "I should not tell you this," she muttered, "but the bank sent your parents a demand letter last week. They are 3 months behind on payments. If they do not get the money soon, the bank is going to start the foreclosure process and they will be left without a home." I stirred my coffee slowly. "Let me guess," I said. "They are about to lose everything." Claire nodded. "If they do not pay, yes," she confirmed. "The bank has had enough. It is just a matter of time." I knew perfectly well what was going to happen next. They were going to show up at the door of my grandmother's house, my house, upset and apologizing. They were going to promise me that everything would change, that now they really were going to value what I had done, that it would be different. My mom would maybe arrive with a homemade apple pie, just like the first time she came to talk about the house swap, smiling as if it were a normal family gathering. But I was already done. I was done being their safety net. I was done watching how everything revolved around Paige. I was done letting them manipulate me with the word family. They had made their choices. Multiple mortgages, personal loans, luxury trips, expensive cars, private college, a dream honeymoon. Now it was their turn to face the consequences. I looked around my grandmother's house again, my house, the solid walls, the blooming garden, the rocking chair in the living room. She had left it to me so I would have a secure future, not so I could rescue my parents from every bad decision. They are going to lose everything, my Aunt Michelle said in her last call. Are you really not going to help them? I thought about the 4 years I spent paying a mortgage that was not mine, about every extra payment they used for vacations. I thought about the night they changed the locks and left my things in the garage, about Paige, living in the house I paid for, looking at me from the door and telling me it was not her problem. No, I finally said, I am not going to help them. Sometimes the hardest lesson to learn is that you cannot help those who do not want to help themselves. My parents made their choices based on favoritism and poor decisions. Now it was their turn to live with the results. I had my own life to build in my own house with my own future. Comment. This story really made me pause and reflect. I've learned that protecting your peace is never selfish. Setting clear boundaries, even with family, is an important form of self-respect. You deserve to be treated with the same kindness you show others. It's okay to choose yourself when things feel one-sided. Taking responsibility for your own future is incredibly empowering. True healing often starts the moment you decide that enough is enough. Healthy relationships should lift you up, not drain you. I encourage you to think about where you might need stronger boundaries in your life. Choosing your well-being is one of the most loving things you can do for yourself. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.